billing, isn't it? When somebody says you're fantastic. I mean, how do you do that? I don't know. Let me say straight away, how, I mean, I'm really glad to be doing this. This is a really important group of people that you all either work with or represent in some way or other. And it's an area that I've been fascinated about, sight loss and so on, for many years. My credentials, let me first of all say to you, for those of you that can't see me, I love, from blind and partially sighted people, I often say I've got jet black hair and I'm 23, assuming they can't see me, which is part of my joke, really. But I'm actually a lot older than that, and I've got grey hair. And I'm sitting in my home office. I live in Hertfordshire, and I haven't bothered, for those of you that can see me at all, and those of you that can't, I've got bookcases in my room, but I haven't arranged my Shakespeare and Dickens in order so that you can impress people when you're on Zoom calls. My office, for those of you can see, is a bit ramshackle. I'm wearing glasses. I've got a reddish top on and a check shirt, and I'm using earbuds rather than big headphones because I find them somewhat, they get in the way. Oh, and I've got a moustache, a very grey moustache, which my kids have always said I should shave off. It would make me look younger, but I've never bothered. So that's the sort of physical bit. I'm a wheelchair user. I got polio when I was 3 back in the day. And so I've always been disabled. And one of the things that I often share with people is that this is so normal for me that I dream in a wheelchair. If I dream at all, I am in a wheelchair. I am not walking. So for me, this is a very normal state of affairs. And it comes as a great surprise to me when I meet people who think it's a bit odd. They're normally called non-disabled people. Now, clearly, I've been disabled all my life. My conscious world has always been disability. I recognize that for many, that is exactly the opposite case. They were minding their own businesses and then something happened to them and they went blind, or they became disabled, or something else happened. So my experiences in that sense are quite different. But I've lived a life as a disabled person. And really what I want to do with you today is to kind of share some thinking about what I've learned and thinking about how the world of disability, and I encompass, of course, blind people in that definition, really, how the world is working for us now and what we need to do. So I've called this talk, if that's what it is, interestingly, taking back control. I hadn't, when I got that up there, I thought I've heard that before somewhere, and I couldn't quite remember where. And then I remembered it was all Brexity stuff, wasn't it? This is coincidental. And taking back control, and nothing about us without us. Now, this is a 1980s, 90s mantra that disability organizations and campaigners created. And I wanted to focus today around these two areas, really. How do we control the situations that we're in? How do we make sure that we're involved in the conversation? It's that kind of logic that I want to apply. And I've kind of told you a bit about myself, but just to add to it, from 1986 till 2019, I ran a disability consultancy company privately, and I worked with some of the biggest organizations in the UK, doing things around getting disabled people into employment, or helping organizations keep disabled people that were already employed but had become disabled. It was a very successful business. I stopped doing it a year or so ago. I'm the former chair of Radar. Some of you might remember Radar and the Radar key and all that stuff. And it became Disability Rights UK, where I was the chair. And that's where I met Sarah all those years ago. She worked with us at Disability Rights UK. I'm currently the chair of the Research Institute for Disabled Consumers and the vice chair of the Activity Alliance, which is encouraging disabled people to be more active. The really important bit about this conversation is that I have for over 30 years run personal development programs for disabled people. And I've learned a lot about what we need to do in order to control our own destinies. And that's why I'm here with you today. I'm also a podcaster, isn't everybody? If you aren't doing a podcast, I don't know where you've been. Mine are called The Way We Roll, which I do with a friend called Simon Minty. And the other I do for the RIDC, which is Gear, Gadgets and Gizmos. I'm also the co-author of a book called Why Are You Pretending to Be Normal? And I will tell you a bit about that in a minute because that's relevant. And finally, I'm a campaigner, I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent, and I'm a Chelsea supporter. Very important, that last bit. Very, very important. No, I'm getting shaking of the head from Nick. What's the matter, Nick? Come on. Chelsea are a great team. Okay. The format for this, I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to say what you thought about what I said. And then I'm going to talk again for a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask you again what you thought about what I said. So this should be a bit interactive. I know there's a lot of you, but it would be brilliant if you could chip in with thoughts. Sarah's looking after the chat side of this. So if you are able to see that and type stuff down, that's great. She'll flag it up for me. If not, just kind of stick your hand up, wave around, and Sarah will spot you and then come to you. So that's the sort of format. And I guess overall, the format or the conversation is around the importance of language for disability organizations and disabled people. And it's about the vision and mission and bringing about change for individuals and organizations. That's the kind of overarching theme of what I want to cover. So let's go back to this nothing about us without us. My first real thought about this was when I noticed when I was in hospital at one time that I had a very, very thick file. It was full of information, none of which, it was all about me, and I had never seen it. And when the doctor kind of slipped out of the room at some point, I decided to read it. Well, what I could of it. And I was surprised at how the medical profession saw me. I was about 14 at the time. And it's stayed with me ever since, this idea that there are files about me somewhere, and I've not been involved in contributing to them. These are all other people's observations. Then in the 80s and 90s, I started hanging out with lots of disabled people, many of whom were very angry disabled people, and they started using terms like nothing about us without us. And I'm sure some of you remember all this stuff, but it was a really important moment where disabled people began to say, you will never talk about us unless we are in the room. You will not make assumptions about us unless we are, unless you share those assumptions with us. So this idea that we are the done to, that we are the helped, that we are passive recipients of your ministrations were being severely challenged in the 1980s and 90s. And I'm sure that challenge continues. It is very easy to talk about us when we're not in the room because we might be embarrassing. We might ask awkward questions. And those of you that are running services and making provision for disabled people in the areas of interest to you, I would urge you never to have conversations without people affected being present. It's vitally important that we shape our own futures. So that's one major plank of this conversation. Nothing about us without us. I think in part we need to, in a sense, modernize this view. So we need to be thinking about, in the world that we now live in, we're talking, 40 years on from the 1980s, does this still hold true? Yes, it does. But the way of doing it's different. We now have social media. We have all sorts of ways of communicating. The COVID experience has taught us all that this is a way we can communicate. Most of us did not use Zoom before COVID. Most of us. Some of us did, but most of us didn't. Now everybody's using it. It's a kind of common practice. That changes communication. That changes the way the nothing about us without us works. We have to grasp this new way of communicating to ensure that our voices are heard and that we are being listened to. Really important. So is our organization still relevant and attractive and of interest to today's sight impaired population? These are questions for you to ask yourselves. Are we still relevant? If we aren't, why are we still here? Why don't we just pack up, distribute the money and go somewhere else? So a big organizational question, and we did this at Radar and we did it at Disability Rights UK. What are we here for? What is our purpose? What is the mission? Is it still relevant? And if it is, are we getting the message out in a way which is making it interesting to other people, our stakeholders, potential stakeholders? Another thought is our organization thriving or surviving? Now, in COVID times, where money's drying up, where people are finding it incredibly difficult to earn livings and all those kinds of things, and charities and voluntary organizations are struggling like Billy-O, of course they are, it's still a good question to ask. Are we thriving or just surviving? And that's about mission again. Are people coming to us, or are we having to go out and find them? I was very proud of my business from one point of view. I never, ever advertised. I never marketed my business. People just heard about what we were doing and came and said, can you help us with that? Your organizations should be the same. People should be queuing up because they've heard of you and what you're doing interests them and they want to know more about it. It's that kind of thing. And with the beauty of internets and all those communications tools that are around now, and I by the way, I should also immediately state that I recognize that for some people with sight impairments, they are very difficult to use. I get that. The access issue has never gone away. But nonetheless, we still have to find a way of getting our message out so that people come to us. And that then, of course, deals with what's the future for us? What does our organization, where is our organization? Are we still going to be around in 20 years' time? And if so, why? And what are we doing? You keep hearing, I keep hearing, you probably hear it too, organizations that say, we are here to do ourselves out of a job. We are here to make the services we use and provide redundant because they're available to everybody now. Well, I haven't found an organization yet that succeeded in doing that. You know, they're all still around. So do we mean it? Is this true? Or is it just some kind of statement that we make that's part of our charitable purpose? We're here to make ourselves go away. I don't know. Let me stop there just for a few minutes and see what responses you might have to what I've just been saying. Any questions, or you're talking out the back of your head, mate, whatever. Either wave your hand or just press your buttons and Sarah will pick up on.
So there is, I mean, people are using the chat. So
Fabulous.
Mike, yeah, so Mike has said the professional medicals tend not to mention us, charities, as we do not provide medical intervention, but practical.
Good, yeah. We're not doctors.
And then Diane says, in an ageing society and an improving medical profession, we are more relevant as there are more of us.
Very true. Very true. And we're going to increase. This population will increase. I intend to die when I'm 125. I'm going to be a thorn in their sides for another 40 years. So, but you're quite right. Taking that point seriously, an aging population makes huge demands on the societies that support them. And, you know, many of us will, I'm not earning money now like I used to, but I'm still working. I'm still doing stuff. And I hope to be continuing. And this medium makes it possible for me to continue to do that for as long as I can talk. The day that happens, well, that's probably it. But yeah, good points. Anything else anybody wants to just ask or challenge? You know, come on, Phil. I'm not sure that's quite right.
And feel free to turn your mic off and speak as well. Turn your mic on and just speak up. So Chloe has said, as the personalised care agenda is rolled out, we will need to be even better at communicating our mission and making it relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. I have no quarrel with that. I'm looking for a quarrel, but I can't find any yet. I think it's what's happening to the world we live in. When I was a child, the world was a very simple place. I was a little child who couldn't walk, and society looked after me. And it did its best. And I have very happy memories of being a disabled kid on the whole. But when I left my special school, and I've had this story from so many blind people, when I left my blind school, I was about as equipped to deal with the world I lived in as a warthog is to capture an elephant. I mean, you know, what I learned was nothing that was relevant. But I was a very happy little disabled child, and I learned that people looked after me. That's what I learned. I didn't learn independence or, you know, my own self-determination. I didn't learn that stuff. Well, the world now's moved on, but there's still an element of that. I don't know if I think blind people are probably more likely to encounter that kind of pity, help me please kind of attitude than, say, you know, paraplegics in wheelchairs are. So there's a kind of mission still to go on there. But yes, it's the idea of co-production, the ideas of independent living, the ideas of employment, all those things are now really relevant. And the organizations that are supporting people with sight loss are important in making sure that those agendas are properly followed and implemented. Okay. Well,
Phil, Hayley has just said, I think we as a society forget that disabled children will become disabled adults and may want or need jobs and cars and hobbies and so on.
Yes. And partners and sex and going to the cinema and doing what everybody else does. What all that lot, so-called normal lot, do, you know? We want to do the same as the normals, whatever that is. So, yes, absolutely. There's no point in. When I got polio, I was in an iron lung for 3 months. I very nearly died, and I survived. Well, what was the point of survival if all I was going to do was lie in a bed for the rest of my life? Might as well have turned the machine off. I mean, what's the point? So it's kind of saying, if society is investing all this resource in helping us, you know, get us ready for a world which we can use, well, what's the point of then throwing away all the work by just leaving us to be unemployed or living in an institution or something? Those days are gone. We should be thinking much more creatively. And I think,
Phil, can I, because it's our first volunteer to actually speak, can we hear from Paul Gillett, who has put his hand up?
Paul, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
One of the things I think that COVID has reinforced is almost this, I think it's called learned helplessness or learned passivity, where almost the expectation is that we are not active and we're not participating in society. And people have a lot of people have sort of gone back into a shell, or perhaps not, their expectations have reduced significantly. And I think that's one of the challenges we will face as we come out of COVID and as we move on in whatever the situation is actually reinvigorating that commitment to activity and commitment to participation.
There's a lot in that, Paul, isn't there? I mean, speaking personally, I haven't been out to talk about really since January. I have other impairments which are related to my age and stuff. So I've been being very, very careful. Do you know what? It's quite cozy sitting at home. I quite like it. The idea that but I live in a world where other human beings live and I want to be with them too. So there is some issues here for us about loss of confidence. And this is something blind people know all about, you know, the confidence issue. But COVID has reinforced it. It's made it, it's obviously made it particularly, I mean, I have 3 of my board members at RIDC are blind or partially sighted, and they've been talking very powerfully about how the support they need is no longer available, the simple support of having someone guide them because of the shielding and because of the fact that COVID is, you know, that kind of infectious stuff. So we have a real job on our hands. Those of you that are working with organizations that are supporting sight impaired people have got a real job on, as Paul says, to encourage us back out, to start challenging things again. I think the other thing is that I'm also using the COVID experience as a way of seeing how technology might be used differently, how I can expand my universe. I understand this morning, for example, that Colin Lowe had something like 400 people potentially listening to him. Well, if we were all meeting as a group, we'd have had about 25 probably, or 30. So there are some real opportunities here for us to get our messages out and so on. So I think you're right, Paul. I think we've got to think expansively rather than inwardly. And I know that COVID is very real. This is not something that, we should just poo-poo and laugh at. It is serious stuff, and it affects disabled people and sight impaired people in particular in all sorts of ways, many of which are even more disabling than the thing that they're dealing with. So I get that. But let's also look, I tend to be the half glass full sort of bloke. Let's look at the positives. What comes out of this that's going to help us with our overall mission? I think there are some seriously good things that we can grab. And I kind of, that moves me on a bit really to this idea of language and how language does or doesn't define us. I mean, think about words like of and for. Oh, this was a big thing in the 90s again, of and for. Are you an organization of disabled people, or are you an organization for disabled people? If your organization is not run by disabled people, then you're for disabled people. And I'm not one of these people that says that disabled people should be in charge of everything, et cetera, et cetera. I like partnerships. When I worked with Sarah at Disability Rights UK, we had a really good team, some of whom were disabled, some of whom weren't. And they worked jointly on the mission, whatever that mission was, and it worked. So of and for, but when it comes to making decisions about disabled people's lives, they should be in the ascendant. They should be driving that. So that's the of and for. What about words like coping and managing? These are very simple words, but they convey enormous things. Coping means I'm just about treading water. Managing means I'm in control. So is your organization coping or is it managing? Are the individuals that you work with coping or managing? We want to move them from coping to managing. There's no fun in coping. You're going nowhere. You're in charge of nothing. You're just coping. And why am I getting so excited about all this? Because I believe, and I've learned this over the last 40 years, that if I see myself differently, I will behave differently, and therefore I will get a different reaction from other people. So if I'm coping, people see a flounderer and rush to help. If I'm managing, they leave me alone and talk to me about what it is I'm managing and how clever I am for doing it. There's a different conversation. What about, this is the British disease, hopefully. I would banish that word, hopefully. Oh, hopefully we'll win the World Cup. Really? When was the last time you heard an Australian say, in the next test match against the English, we hopefully will win? It's not in them. We're going to thrash them. That's what we're going to do to them. It's we will, not hopefully. So hopefully is too vague and wishy-washy. The separation between impairment and disability. I'm with groups of people today who should understand this very clearly. Impairment is polio. Disability is the lack of a ramp. We are about deconstructing disability. We are not about, some of the organizations clearly at this conference are in the business of supporting research, a whole range of interventions directly targeting the impairments that cause blindness. Retinitis pigmentosa, macular degeneration. These are things that people are working on to get rid of. And there's nothing wrong with that. But while we wait, there are thousands, if not millions of people with these eye conditions who are being disabled because they can't find their way around their bloody high street, or they can't use the insurance website. These are disabling them. And I suspect that many of you listening to me and those that aren't listening to me are engaged in that struggle. how do we deal with disability as it affects people who have sight loss? How do we deal with the disability? That is a different construct from dealing with impairments. So it's kind of separating these two things out and being very clear what our organization's role is, either in fundraising and so on and so forth for medical research, which is fine, or looking at how we deconstruct disability in a modern environment. And one of the biggest disabling areas is, of course, employment. More than almost any other group, blind people find it the most difficult to find work and stay in it. And blind people who are in work are the ones who rarely, if ever, then move to a more highly paid job because the risks are too high. So what they do is they stay where they are. So their talent is being wasted. The employer doesn't mind because they're nice and cozy, they just get on with their jobs. I remember in 1996, when it was 1996, a bit before 96, there was a recognition that we no longer needed switchboards in large corporations. And suddenly people discovered blind people sitting in little rooms somewhere who were putting leads into what they call doll's eyes or whatever, putting you through, sir. Well, when that got automated, they suddenly had all these blind people that they needed to do something with. No one even remembered they were there. It was kind of almost, this group of people were incredibly talented, but they just spent their lives doing that kind of work. So it's kind of saying, how do we undo all that stuff? And one of the ways we do it is to start using language in a different way. For those of you that are responsible for things like getting the word out for your organization and so on, how do you describe your organization? I looked at 15 different blind charities last night. I knew I was going to be talking to you guys. And I thought, I wonder what they're like. So I read them. And overarching was pity and poverty and poor and helpless. These were the themes that most of the ones I just happened to chance upon put at the forefront. Those were the messages. Well, that did not have, if I'm being blunt, any appeal to me. There were, of course, when I dug around, much more conversations around work, living independent lives, all those kinds of things. There were lots of services being provided for companionship and helping people manage their way through their rent arrears or whatever. There were lots of services available. But the overarching thing wasn't of a dynamic, let's change the world. It was more about, it's really difficult if you're blind. Let us see if we can help you. Kind of message. I'm not sure that's going to be fit for purpose in the 21st century. There is a need for companionship. There is a need to support people. There is a need to find things for people that can't do, particularly retired older people who are feeling very lonely and isolated. Of course, there are needs for that. But how are we coming over, I think, is an important thing. So what are our websites like? What are our social media outputs like? What are our promo materials like? What messages? Revisit them. Have another look at them. Does it still make sense? And finally, in this little bit, before I ask you to chip in, there's, of course, how you describe yourself. How do you describe yourself? As an individual with some kind of eye condition, how do you describe yourself? Do you spend a lot of your time apologizing? I'm sorry, If I had one word to abolish from disabled conversations, it would be, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't go on holiday because I can't walk. I'm sorry I can't do this because I can't see. I'm sorry I can't. I never apologize for being a wheelchair user. I stopped doing that 40 years ago. And I would advise that part of our mission is to honor who we are, not apologize for it. So let me pause again and see whether that's rattled any cages.
Okay, Phil, because you covered an awful lot there. There was quite a few people had things to say on the communication and language things you were talking about. So
okay.
Alison Coe was saying communicating your mission means challenging stereotypes, Phil.
Yep.
The idea of someone needing pity is still very common. And I think we did discuss that, particularly in the sight loss sector. But also now as the disabled person who is accomplishing amazing things is also common. There is no middle ground for disabled people who want to live everyday lives. So I think there's, you're either the amazing disabled person or the pitied disabled person. And then other people saying that they do have employees and board members who are visually impaired. And Tim Jeffrey from the Torch Trust saying one of the positives is that we have proven to ourselves that we can adapt quickly. Change is possible, but how do we learn from this and get more flexible? And Diane saying it's how the world is set up that disables us. We are very able otherwise.
Well, I can't disagree with just about any of that. that kind of is saying what I'm saying. Absolutely. I think this the Paralympian versus the where's the ordinary, you know, my day job's a bit different, I guess, from a lot of people's day jobs. But I did say that I'm a parent and a grandparent and a Chelsea supporter. The Chelsea supporter probably is the more disabling than being a wheelchair user, if I'm being honest. But the idea that I live an ordinary life, that, you know, I quarrel with my wife and I like my garden, and, you know, I am ordinary in that sense. I enjoy the same things that most other people enjoy, I guess, although we're all different. Yes, this idea that you've got to be somehow kind of superhuman or at the other end of that continuum, nothing at all, is I agree with the person who said that. I think we don't see enough in the media of people just getting on with their lives, doing ordinary things. I used to say, when I did lots of training programs, when was the last time you saw a blind person with a guide dog, an assistance dog, going into the Queen Vic in Coronation Street or Albert Square, whichever the bloody thing is? It was Rover's Return, wasn't it, in Coronation Street? The Queen Vic in EastEnders, and going up to the bar and saying, could I have a light and bitter, please? Drinking it and then leaving and never being seen again. What would normally happen is they'd go in with the guide dog would be kidnapped. We'd have a 6-week storyline about whether the guide dog was ever seen again. And then we'd all kind of move on to the next thing, which would be about paraplegic falling down the stairs whilst, you know, trying to lift a wardrobe up them. None of it was, so sorry, I'm being a bit over the top here. It's very dramatic. And life is occasionally dramatic, but mostly it's the same for everyone else. It should be. Yeah, good point. Anything else in there?
So Natalie from Galloway's, what your advice is on balancing their messages to inspire the people who use our services and promote the positivity of our services, but also evoke the emotional message to get people to donate.
Yeah, God, this is the real conundrum, isn't it? There was Natalie, was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, good old Natalie to spot the difficult one. Yeah, how do I get your Barclay card without making you cry? Isn't that the you know, charity is based on an emotion, make people feel pity, and then they will give, you know, and we're all suckers for it. I do it, you know, we're human beings, you know, we give a damn. So when we see some real distress and we see some way of helping by throwing maybe a 10 quid at it, well, why wouldn't we do it? I mean, is he Colonel or Field Marshal Tom Moore yet? I mean, you know, he walked up and down his garden with his Zimmer and raised God knows how much money. How did he do that? I think he should run this day, not me. He should be sat here telling you how to get money. But he didn't do it with pity, though, did he? He did it to get money for the NHS. It was quite an interesting, different campaign. But Natalie's right. We've got to somehow find ways of getting people to contribute. Disability Rights UK really had a challenge in this area, because what we were trying to do was to say, if you would give us some money, we can make life difficult for the establishment, because that's what we do. That's our job. It's the campaign. We weren't providing particular services like, you know, residential settings or that sort of thing. We were troublemakers in a sense. We were providing information and so on. And it was a very difficult ask. But Natalie's question is central to how your organization is seen. And therefore, you need to be very careful, would be my advice, about how you approach your charity giving, your appeals. You have to make me feel more powerful as a result of what you've done rather than less powerful. I remember the Lifeboat Association saying that they didn't really need the tin thing on the street corners because they received such fabulous donations from all sorts of other sources. But the reason they had the tins was to help the volunteers feel more important. Well, I'm sorry, that kind of isn't the point, is it? I mean, the point is the image of the disabled person needs to be enhanced, not lessened by the way we collect the money. So I think there's something in that. Natalie's, hit something very important.
Yeah, and Kevin, who has come back to Natalie and said that he feels the pity messaging resonates with supporters, but doesn't pity just make you feel sad, depressed, and unmotivated? If charities share messages that galvanise, inspire, challenge injustices, make you feel more inspired and ready to act, is that not better?
Well, I would agree with that. I think the other thing is that we when you become a disabled person, you lose your sight, whatever, there is that period of time where you don't know how to be. You don't know who you are now. You're searching around for some way of doing this. And so you light on people. And one of the first things that we all know about, sight loss is that, of course, now I'm totally incompetent. I can't go out and I need lots and lots of help. Well, where did that message come from? Well, that message came from Charities for the Blind. That's where it came from. So when I'm doing my initial data retrieval for how am I supposed to now live as a blind person, my first messages are the ones that I remember from the charities I used to give to when I was a sighted person. It's only when I start meeting other blind people who are doing amazing things or being brilliant about running their families and taking their kids to school and all that stuff. When I meet them, I suddenly think, hang on a minute, there is a different way of being. I can be different from this stereotype that I keep seeing. And I think that's the role that we now have. It's to debunk that stereotype and help people see that. And this is I know is one of the slogans from blind people is, there's life after blindness. Of course there is. But we want to big that up rather than big up the helpless dependency stuff that's so prevalent everywhere. And that's not just the blind charities, by the way. That's lots and lots of different disability charities. I suppose one of the things I would say, and I'm conscious of time, but I'm very happy to keep, answering the questions as they come. So chip in, Sarah, just interrupt me if it makes sense to do that.
Just one before it's lost, because I think Kathy Lowe from London Vision has made a point. It's slightly different on your when you were talking about language again, which is Is there a word which can move us on from managing sight loss, maybe to embracing skills and experience that you have an impairment, that having an impairment gives you?
I think that's a really interesting question, because I started off having infantile paralysis, then I had poliomyelitis, and then I'm an old polio. I'm not sure about the last one. Language, when I was a child, I was a cripple, and then I became physically handicapped, and now I'm a disabled person. Language is moving on all the time. And if you guys have words that you think resonate better than managing, let's start using them, because you'll be changing the way we view things. When we start talking, you remember the great changes in talking. We used to talk about colored people, didn't we? Black people now. We used to use terms that we would now see as incredibly offensive about gay people. But now we talk about gay people. The words and the way we describe ourselves matter hugely. And I'm banishing the word coping. the word that's in vogue is managing. But if there's another one, which is embracing, controlling, pioneering, then I'm interested, because I think that moves us forward rather than continually looking backwards. So I am really up for that. Yes, managing is not fixed. It's current. It's the way we're talking about it currently, but it's not fixed. Good stuff. Yeah, if you come up with one, please tell me.
Can we go to Nick, Phil, who's put his hand up to hear another voice?
Yes, Nick, go for it.
You're muted at the moment, Nick, but if you want to speak and maybe Nick does not want to.
There is a hat. Oh, no, there we are. Nick's pushed the right button.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Nick. Can hear you. What's your question? Or your
you were doing well until you were a Chelsea supporter. I'll say that.
I saw you shaking your head, actually.
There was recently a quote, and it resonated with me. I think it was actually the Oscar Pistorius documentary, and he said, "When you're inspiring, you're doing well. When people stop telling you that you're inspiring, you're a threat." And I think some charities, my own ones as well, like saying what you're saying, really, we're not very good at conveying when people are doing well. We kind of stop there sometimes. So it's more getting that across. I think that backs up what you were saying, really.
Yes. Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it? Oscar Pistorius is a really interesting case, isn't he? Because he's now an arch villain, which kind of says things like disabled people can be bad, can't they? They can do naughty things. Do you know what I mean? We're not all these angelic, lovely, little brave, whatever we're supposed to be. So there's something about Oscar that's quite interesting. But the point you're making is a good one, that in a sense, I don't want to be told I'm inspiring, but I like it if somebody says that I've inspired them to do something. I think there's a difference. I love language. I love playing around with it. I don't want to be inspirational, but I do like the fact that other people are inspired by what I've done. Because that it's like all sorts of things. When you see somebody else do something, it must be possible. So why can't I have a go at it then? You know? So I think there is something in what you're saying, Nick, about that. And I there's nothing wrong with us using stories are everything. If you've got stories, powerful stories of what people have done, and not in spite of their blindness, but because of it, then I'm interested in that story. Because I often say, I am who I am because of my disability, not in spite of it. It's part of me. Now, I know for many newly disabled people, that sounds like a weird thing to say, but for me, it informs every part of me, just as my gender does. I'm a bloke. That tells me something about the world I live in. I react to the world I live in as a bloke. There are certain things I guess I have to do because I'm a bloke, kind of thing. Well, why wouldn't that be true of my disability too? Why isn't my disability as much a valid part of my experience as anything else? And I think that message is often missing. I am who I am because I'm disabled, not in spite of it. That is a very different way of viewing your world. If you're in spite of it, you're trying to get rid of it. And I'm not knocking that. I'm not one of these people that says we shouldn't look for cures and all that kind of stuff. Of course we should. I don't think there's anything inherently good about polio. I think there's a lot of inherently good things about me who had polio, but I don't think polio in itself is some kind of wonderful thing that everyone should experience. Neither is macular degeneration, But when we meet people who are managing their lives well, who are also managing that kind of impairment, then I am interested in that story and want them to tell me how they did it, because I'd like to learn. Can I move us on for the last bit of this conversation to just offer you some thoughts about how you might move things forward, how you could change things? I've got this, it's not mine, by the way, this is something I picked up, but it really works for me. Making change happen. And for those of you that love equations, you're going to love this. because this is D times V. I have, by the way, guaranteed Sarah that I will send her the notes I'm using so that she can circulate them to everybody. But I can see people writing stuff down. D times V times S for sugar have to be greater than RC. All right, that's the equation. D for dog times V for vision times S must be greater than RC. Now, what am I on about? Okay. This comes from the work of Beckard Harris. It's called the change model. You might have come across it. I highly commend it. In order for something to change, in order for us to want to move something forward, we have to be dissatisfied with where we are now. That's the D, dissatisfaction. People do not jump off a window ledge of a burning building until the flames are licking the soles of their feet. They are so dissatisfied with their current position, they jump. You will never get people to move if they are happy where they are. You have got to, therefore, deliberately sow the seeds of dissatisfaction. You've got to start helping them see that where we are now is not very good. It could be better if we were somewhere else. I'm talking both you as an individual, as a human being. If you're not dissatisfied with your current job, you won't move. You won't go for the promotion. You won't ask for a raise. You just carry on as you are because you're happy. You're not dissatisfied. So that's the D. D times V. Well, it's all very well being dissatisfied, but what's the vision of where I'd like to be? What is it that I'd like to be doing instead? How could my organization be doing something else? What is the something else? If it's no longer true that we provide services of, say, a residential kind to our user groups, what should we be providing? Oh, employment. Oh, okay. Well, how do we do that then? That's the V. V is for vision. We must know where we want to go. Well, that's all very well, but how do I get there? That's the S, the steps. If any one of those is not present, then you will not see change. So first we have to say that all is not well with the current state of play. We need to do something differently, and you need to help people see what's wrong with the current situation. You can either do that as an individual or as a group of people. I'm talking to you as an organization really now. Then you have to provide them with the idea of what it would look like if we got there. What's the vision? And then you've got to give them the steps by which they get there. So let's suppose that resistance to change is 20. I am 20. I'm not too, but D times V times S equals 21. Then I will change. Something will move. So it's thinking like that. Either you personally, you're not happy with what's going on for you. This same model applies as it would for you as a manager of your organization or the leader in your organization. This formula works. And it's pretty easy to understand because when you think about a very simple example, you've been driving, you've been living in the house you live in for 25 years and it's fine. And then one day your partner tells you that you're going to have a baby. And suddenly this one bedroomed house that you're living in is no longer going to be big enough. You begin to be dissatisfied with it. Nothing wrong with the house. It hasn't moved. It hasn't changed. It hasn't done anything differently, but you have. So now what you have to do is think about, well, where could we move instead? What can we afford? Where would it be? Dum-de-dum-de-dum. Do you have some idea of the house? Well, it's got to have 2 bedrooms. There might be issues about schooling and all that kind of stuff. So now you start taking steps to find out what the schools are like, what you can afford, could you get a loan, dum-de-dum-de-dum. When all of that's in place, you move. It's not quite as simple as that, but you get the idea. Yeah. So making change happen can be a kind of process that you engineer. It's not chance. It's not luck. It's something that you engineer. And some of the questions that you've raised already and asked link to a recognition that you might not be where you want to be as an organization. The question is, how do we move and how do we take everyone else with us? And that includes your stakeholders. Some of the most resistant to change people I've ever met have been people living in institutions who don't want them closed. Well, you can see why, can't you? Because things are okay as they are. You don't live here. What would you know? Etc., etc. Let me pause there. We've got 10 minutes to go. There might be other things you want to ask or raise or question. But I commend that model to you as a way of exploring how you can move forwards and change things from where they are now to how you think they ought to be.
Not so much questions, but other things that have come in on, again, language, Phil, is, yeah, some people sharing the depressing thing that people still say suffer from a visual impairment.
I guess.
Bill Curry said a word that I would use is encourage/encouraging. And Diane making the point that the workplace always says they like problem solvers, so why not us? Aren't disabled people the best problem solvers?
Yes. Yes, they're all, that's all good stuff. Absolutely. I love the suffering. Yeah. I've noticed it's, we've also got to be careful about not using words inappropriately. For example, I don't know how many of you agree with this statement. I'm getting a bit fed up with hearing that COVID is damaging my mental health. I think COVID is causing me challenges. I think people with mental health conditions rightly would argue that we don't know what we're talking about when we talk about mental health. Are we talking about mental ill health or are we talking about mental health? We've all got mental health, and COVID might make some of us have mental ill health. But this kind of overuse of these terms don't help us, actually. So the word suffering, there are some people who are genuinely suffering. There's no question about that, but they should define that, not us. They should be the ones to say that, not us. We don't make it as a general statement about disabled people that they suffer from. I have polio, I don't suffer from it. So it's a different way of saying it. I mean, when we're in conversations with other people, we can say, I have a thing called so-and-so, but I don't suffer from it. I live with it. I manage it. And the person who mentioned talent, God, dear, oh dear, I do remember somebody doing an appraisal, an annual review, and it was a blind person going for their annual review. And the manager was doing the review. And they got on well, these two, so there was no conflicts or anything. He said, well, I think it's time you should be looking for promotion. You know, you should be looking for something else, but because you will have all sorts of difficulties, won't you? Because we've got to find ways to explain how you could be good at problem solving and so on. And the blind person said, I've used more problem solving getting to work this morning than you will use for the rest of the day. And the manager said, to his great credit, I haven't really been managing your talent very well, have I? So there's something in this, that talent is what we have, and problem solving. That doesn't mean we're all good at it. I think it's overuse. But sometimes we do meet people who've got very serious limitations, but find all sorts of interesting ways of getting around them. And I want them in my team because they'd be good at, helping me blue sky something else. It's that we big up, isn't it? That's what our organization should be bigging up. The fact that many of us, not all of us, because that's not true. Not all of us are good at that. but there will be many, many people who've made incredible kind of changes in their lives as a result of sight loss, who are great examples of how to problem solve, get round barriers, do all sorts of stuff. And work and employers need that. That's what they're crying out for. But I suppose we've done such a good job over the last 200 years of showing that blind people are useless and helpless, and really what they need is your money, that when we now come along and say they're brilliant, fantastic problem solvers, oh dear, we've got a bit of undoing of previous messages to deal with first. We're back to my DVS RC conundrum. How do we get the public to change its view? I suppose what we have to do is start telling the public that we're not happy with how they're seeing us. And these are the reasons why. Because we're 50% of all disabled people in the UK, by the way, are still unemployed. That's horrendous. So that hasn't moved, in my knowledge, for 40 or 50 years, that stat. And in there sit blind people, probably as a proportion higher than wheelchair users and so on. And learning disabled people too are also finding it a real struggle to get work. Any other questions or comments before we draw this to a close?
Just 2 points made, Phil. One from Diane saying, sorry to be negative, but changing the message on websites and literature costs money. Changing attitudes does not. And then I haven't read this yet, but I'll just read it as it's written from Donna at Peterborough Society, which is, our primary focus has always been about encouraging people with sight loss to participate in activities that matter to them. COVID has forced us to consider alternative ways of engaging with our members and finding new ways of working with them to ensure they maintain a sense of belonging within the community.
Yes. Well, on the website one, we need to think of innovative ways of raising money to get the website, because the website is your window to the world. That's more now important than it ever was. So if you're prioritizing your cash, I would be prioritizing some of it to go on to website development to make sure it's fit for purpose. And here's a thought, get creative. We did at one time in a different organization I worked for, go and present a university with a problem we had about our website and let their degree students sort it out. And they did it for free. It was part of their degree course. So people studying computer sciences love problems like that. So it's kind of thinking creatively about how you might find a way around the problem of money. And I'm not making that small. I realize money is hugely difficult at the moment, but the website and the way you message out to the world is crucial now, because everybody's using social media in such a different way. But yes, the fundamental point is well made.
Probably brings us close to the end, Phil. We're having lots and lots of compliments. Hayley even forgives you for being a Chelsea fan. The session was so good. So while we're on that point, I do have, it's literally 2-question poll that I would like to launch. And if you've got 2 seconds to give us a bit of feedback before you go, that would be brilliant. But yeah, just any final points, Phil?
None other than to say thank you so much for giving me the time. I hope it's been of some help to you. I realized that I should have just called this session Stirring the Pot, really. Getting you to perhaps revisit stuff and think again about stuff that maybe we've just allowed to drift along a bit. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for your interactions. And I do apologize for the Chelsea bit. It won't happen again.
Until that's the most controversial thing you said, Phil.
I should have kept that quiet, shouldn't I, really? Thank you all very much. It's been a joy. And I will send Sarah my notes so that she can circulate them.
Yeah, huge thank you, Phil, from all of us. I thought that was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you so much. That's very kind. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Phil, I did have one very quick point. Sorry, Glenn from RNIB.
Yeah, go on, Glenn.
You were talking about the university, and I love that idea. some time ago, we actually had people do some app development on a similar basis. But the provision is around in engaging with that university, how do we ensure that the development team actually incorporates somebody that's visually impaired, to ensure that the bottom-up development is done with that in mind. I've been in procurement now for 12 years at RNIB, and one of the biggest challenges I've seen is, one, the cost that suppliers align to trying to make things accessible without regulatory control. And I know that we've recently seen some regulatory control through public sector organisations, but that needs to extend to private sector, and I think that continues to be a challenge. What I'd love to see is, you mentioned there a couple of times about young people. And how does the sector response group, how can the sector response group look to incorporate young people as part of that discussion? These tech innovators, the people that really understand what are the challenges that are met by them and their peers, the people that are Snapchatting every day from the age of 15 onwards. And I'd just love to see the sector engage in a really structured way, even in a paid way, to bring young people on board, to take on board, not through co-production, but to take on board their guidance and advice. Absolutely love the session. Obviously, RNIB, big part of what's going on with Visionary.
Absolutely.
And
just one thought, Glenn, before we end. One way of getting into the youngsters, I suspect, is to start talking about accessible gaming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've come across some extraordinary people doing really weird and crazy stuff with games, and they're 20 somethings. But yeah, good point. Very good point.
And that connectivity that they have with their friends and their friends' friends. I mean, it's a power platform in itself, and social media just works so quickly. How do you keep up with that?
Yeah.
But thank you, Phil.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to say, thoroughly enjoyed the session.
Thank you, Glenn. That's very kind of you. Much obliged. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all.